I never thought parking my own cars in front of my own house could cause so much chaos. But then again, I never thought an HOA could be this petty either. Let me start from the beginning, because trust me, you won't believe how this ends. I had always been a car guy. It's not just the kind of guy who washes his sedan every Sunday, but the type who could spend hours tinkering in the garage, rebuilding an engine, or finding joy in the roar of a perfectly tuned exhaust. Over the years, I collected more than just a few cars. Some people collect stamps. Some collect baseball cards, collected vehicles. Each one had a story, a memory, a piece of me in it. When I bought my house in this so-called prestigious neighborhood, I thought I was stepping into peace. Wide streets, trimmed lawns, friendly neighbors, or so it seemed. My driveway could fit for cars easily, but sometimes I parked on the street too. I mean, that's what streets are for, right? Apparently not. According to my HOA, the first letter I got seemed harmless enough. Dear homeowner, we have noticed multiple vehicles parked in your driveway and on the street. Please be advised that excessive vehicles violate the aesthetic standards of our community. I actually laughed when I read it. Excessive. I thought maybe they had me mixed up with someone else, but a week later, another letter came. This one wasn't so polite. Failure to remove your excess vehicles will result in fines. They even underlined the word fines. Now, let me be clear, I wasn't running some kind of used car dealership. I wasn't cluttering up the street with broken down junkers. My cars were clean, well-maintained, and neatly parked. But the HOA board didn't see it that way. To them, I was some kind of neighborhood menace ruining their little kingdom. At first, I ignored it. Honestly, I thought it was a joke. But then came the fines slipped right into my mailbox. $100 here, $250 there, escalating every week. And with each fine, the tone got nastier. You are disrupting the harmony of this community. Your cars are an eyesore. Your behavior will not be tolerated. Eyesore. Kea. I had a brand new Mercedes, a restored classic Mustang, a Tesla, and a few more I loved like family. They were my pride and joy. So, one evening, I decided to attend the HOA meeting. If they had a problem with me, I wanted to hear it face to face. I walked into the community clubhouse, and you'd think I was some criminal on trial. All the board members sat at a long table, looking down at me like judges. The president, a stiff man with a shiny bald head and an expensive suit, cleared his throat and said, "We need to discuss your vehicle problem." My vehicle problem. That's what he called it? I tried to explain. I told them I worked hard for those cars. I wasn't disturbing anyone. No driveways were blocked. No streets were overcrowded, but they weren't listening. The president smirked and said, "We don't care how hard you worked. Too many cars, lower property values. If you don't comply, we'll escalate this legally." That was the moment I realized something. They didn't see me as a neighbor. They saw me as an enemy. And if they wanted a fight, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Because here's what they didn't know. I didn't just own one house in this neighborhood. Quietly, over the past 2 years, I had been buying property after property. Rentals, investments, opportunities. And by the time that smug president wagged his finger at me, I already owned half the block, and I wasn't planning on stopping. The funny thing was, I sat there in that HOA meeting, biting my tongue while they lectured me like I was some teenager who left his bike on the lawn. They had no idea the ground they were standing on was already mine. I remember leaning back in my chair, folding my arms, and letting them rant. The president kept droning on about community image and rules everyone must follow. He loved the sound of his own voice, and every time he puffed up his chest, I just thought about how clueless he really was. Finally, when they were done, I simply nodded and said, "I'll think about it." That's all. No argument, no defense. I wanted them to think they'd won a little battle, because the truth was, Y was preparing to win the entire war. The next few weeks, the letters didn't stop. The fines kept stacking up. Every time I parked a car on the street, I got another nastygram in the mail. But here's what I did instead of fighting back right away. I kept buying. Another house 2 doors down, then another on the corner. A rental from a family moving out of state. Every signature I put on paper was another nail in the coffin of that HOA board's authority. I was patient. I knew timing mattered, and in the meantime, I let them dig their own grave. They kept filing fines against me thousands of dollars, worth completely unaware that the money was going to end up right back in my pocket. One night, I was sitting on my porch sipping a beer when my neighbor Steve came over. Steve was a good guy, one of the few people around here who actually talked to me like a human being. He leaned on the railing and said, "You know, they're out to get you, right?" I chuckled. "Oh, I know." He shook his head. "Man, they're obsessed. It's all they talk about in the board meetings. They say you're making this place look like a parking lot." That made me laugh even harder. "Funny thing about parking lots," I said. "Usually somebody owns them." Steve gave me this puzzled look. I didn't explain, not yet. But the way his eyebrows furrowed, I could tell he was starting to suspect I wasn't just some random homeowner with too many toys. Then came the big moment. The annual HOA meeting. The one where they gathered all the residents together to vote. On budgets, rules, and board elections. I showed up early, sat quietly in the back, and waited. The room filled with neighbors. Some of them gave me side eyes, whispering about my cars. Others just wanted free donuts and coffee. The president strutted up to the podium like he was running for office. He cleared his throat and launched into his speech about community pride and residents needing to follow the rules. Then he turned his attention to me. Called me out by name, in front of everyone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we cannot allow one homeowner to turn our neighborhood into a circus. This man has repeatedly violated parking restrictions, ignored fines, and disrespected our community values. It's time we take stronger action. Legal action." Gasps filled the room. All eyes turned to me, and that was when I smiled. Because this was the moment I had been waiting for. I stood up slowly, walked to the front of the room, and looked the president square in the eyes. "Stronger action, huh?" I said. "Funny, because I've been taking some action of my own." Pulled a folder from under my arm and set it down on the podium. Inside, copies of every deed, every property record, every house I had purchased on that block. The room went silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming. I opened the folder and began to read names out loud. The Johnsons' old place. Mine. The rental on Maple Street. Mine. The corner lot with the blue shutters. Mine. One by one, I laid the papers down. Faces in the crowd started to change from confusion to shock to outright amusement. Some neighbors even started grinning, realizing what this meant. Finally, I looked back at the president and said, "So when you talk about the community, you might want to remember you're talking about me. Because I don't just live here, I own here." The man's face turned red, then pale. He tried to speak, but no words came out. And in that moment, the entire balance of power shifted. And trust me, that was only the beginning. The silence in that room was priceless. It stretched on and on, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The president finally stammered out, "Teeth, that doesn't change the rules. Ownership doesn't exempt you from community standards." I grinned. "Oh, you're absolutely right. But here's the thing, when you own the majority of the properties in a community, you are the standards." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. People turned to each other, whispering, eyes darting back and forth between me and the stunned board members. Some of the neighbors who had stayed quiet before suddenly started chuckling. A couple even clapped. The vice president, a woman who looked like she'd been practicing her scowl in the mirror for years, leaned forward. "Are you suggesting you can just do whatever you want? That's not how this works." I leaned on the podium casually, like I wasn't even breaking a sweat. "No, I'm suggesting that when you own the majority of homes, you have voting power. And when you have voting power, you decide who sits on that board. And when you decide who sits on the board, you decide the rules." That hit them like a thunderclap. You could almost see the gears turning in their heads as they realized the truth. For the first time, they weren't in control. I didn't push it further yet. I just let the weight of my words hang in the air, then calmly sat back down. The rest of the meeting was chaos. Some neighbors demanded explanations. Others demanded new elections. The board tried desperately to regain order, but it was slipping through their fingers like sand. When the meeting finally ended, the president stormed over to me. His face was beet red, and he jabbed a finger in my chest. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he hissed. I just smiled. "No, I don't think I'm clever. I think I'm prepared. There's a difference." He clenched his jaw so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Then he stormed off, leaving me standing there with half the neighborhood. Watching over the next few weeks, the atmosphere around the block shifted. Suddenly, the people who used to glare at me when I parked a car on the street were waving. The ones who had avoided me were striking up conversations. And slowly, word started to spread. Mr. Too Many Cars didn't just own cars. He owned houses. Lots of them. Of course, the HOA board didn't go down without a fight. They doubled down on fines. They sent threatening letters, citing obscure bylaws, and made up rules. At one point, they even tried to tow one of my cars. Big mistake. Because what they didn't realize was, when you own a property, you don't just own the house, you own the right to the street parking in front of it. And when you own every house on the street, well, let's just say the tow truck driver quickly realized he was in the wrong place. The funniest part? Some of the board members lived in homes I owned. They were literally renting from me, paying me rent every month while fining me for having cars. The irony was so delicious. I could barely keep a straight face when I cashed their checks. It all built up to one final showdown. Special meeting they called, trying to rally the neighborhood against me. They thought they could oust me, embarrass me, take me down. What they didn't know was that by then I had the majority of votes in the community. So when I walked into that meeting, folder in hand, smile on my face, I wasn't just another homeowner fighting back against fines. I was the landlord of the entire board, and it was time to remind them. That special meeting was supposed to be their big moment. They rented out the clubhouse again, set up extra chairs, even printed flyers to stick in people's mailboxes. The president must have thought he was about to stage some kind of neighborhood coup. When I walked in, the place was already buzzing. Neighbors huddled in little groups, whispering. Some looked nervous, some curious, and a few gave me a nod like they knew I was about to put on a show. The president spotted me from across the room, puffed up his chest, and barked, "Ah, the man of the hour. Glad you decided to face the music." Smirked. Wouldn't miss it. He strutted up to the podium like a general about to lead troops into battle. "Residents," he announced dramatically, "we are here tonight because one homeowner has continuously disregarded our community's values, cluttering our streets, ignoring fines, and threatening the harmony of our neighborhood." He gestured at me like I was some villain in a courtroom drama. "It is time we take a vote to escalate legal action against this disruptive individual." There were murmurs, nods from a few loyalists in the front row. But then I stood up, took my time walking to the front, and faced the crowd. I didn't even look at the board, I looked at my neighbors. "Funny thing about votes," I said, smiling. "They only matter if you actually have the numbers." The room went quiet. People leaned in. I pulled out a fresh stack of papers from my folder and held them up. "Since our last meeting, I've purchased 3 more homes on this block, which means..." I paused for effect. "I now hold the majority of ownership in this community." Gasps, whispers. A woman in the back even clapped before realizing no one else had yet. I kept going. "So when you call for a vote against me, you're really just calling for me to vote against myself. And I don't think I'm going to do that." The president's jaw dropped. The vice president sputtered. "This is outrageous. You can't just..." But before she could finish, one of the neighbors stood up. A guy named Tom, who had never said 2 words in a meeting before, raised his voice. "Actually, I'd like to call for a new vote. A vote to dissolve this current board and elect a new one." The room erupted. People started clapping, cheering, even shouting in agreement. The president banged his little gavel on the podium like he was still in control. "Order, order." He yelled, but his voice cracked. I just leaned back and said calmly, "By all means, let's vote." When the ballots were handed out, it wasn't even close. I didn't have to twist arms. Most of the neighborhood had been fed up with the board's nonsense for years. Fines for grass being an inch too tall, letters about trash cans being visible, constant harassment. They were tired of it. My reveal just gave them the push they needed. When the results were counted, every board member was voted out. Every single one. The president sat there stunned, like he couldn't believe it. The vice president looked like she was about to faint. The treasurer muttered something under his breath and stormed out. I walked up to the podium, took the gavel out of the president's hand, and tapped it once. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said with a grin, "there's a new board in town." The room exploded in applause. For the first time, I wasn't the outcast car guy who didn't fit in. I was the guy who had flipped the script, turned the tables, and taken back the neighborhood from the people who had been strangling it. And the best part? I hadn't even revealed my full plan yet, because owning the houses was one thing. Running the neighborhood, that was going to be a whole different game. After that night, everything changed. The board was gone. Their reign of fines, threats, and power trips over. The neighbors who had once avoided me now waved from their porches, stopped by to chat, even offered me homemade pies as a thank you for taking the board down. But here's the thing, I didn't want to just replace one dictatorship with another. I wanted to build something better. So, the first order of business as the new head of the community was simple. No more ridiculous fines. No more letters about grass height. No more threats about trash cans or holiday decorations, and definitely no more harassment over how many cars someone owned. This was people's home, not a prison camp. The relief was instant. The neighborhood started to feel alive again. Kids played in the street without worried parents thinking the HOA would swoop in with complaints. People parked their cars where they needed to without second-guessing it. Front yards started to look less like manicured clones and more like personal spaces with personality. But I didn't stop there. Since I owned so many houses, I invested back into the block, fixed up properties that had been neglected, planted new trees, even added better street lighting and security cameras at key spots, not because of HOA rules, but because safety matters. The transformation was so noticeable that even the local newspaper did a feature on how our once rigid and hostile community had become one of the friendliest in the city. As for the old HOA board, well, let's just say karma works fast. The president, who had been renting his house from me without realizing it, got a letter from me one morning, a rent increase notice. Nothing outrageous, just business. He moved out within 3 months, muttering something about unfair landlords. Oh, the irony. The vice president tried to stir up trouble in another neighborhood. But word about her reputation spread quickly. Last I heard, she's living in a condo with no HOA. Just funny because she used to claim HOAs were the backbone of civilized living. Me, I kept doing what I loved, working hard, collecting cars, and enjoying the freedom of a community I helped reshape. Every time I parked one of my cars on the street, I couldn't help but smile. What once was a violation was now a symbol of victory, and here's the best part. By standing my ground, I gave everyone else on that block a little more freedom too. The neighborhood wasn't just mine, belonged to everyone who lived there. We'd taken it back from people who thought they owned control, when in reality, they owned nothing. So, what's the lesson here? Sometimes the people who try hardest to control you are the ones standing on the weakest ground. They'll puff their chests, wave their little clipboards, and act like kings and queens of the block. But when you know your worth, when you're prepared, patient, and smart bullies, can't win. In the end, the HOA raised my fees for too many cars. But what they didn't realize was I owned every house on the block, and that's how I turned their power trip into my victory lap. If you've ever been pushed around by someone who thought they held all the cards, remember sometimes the best revenge isn't fighting back, loud or angry. Sometimes the best revenge is owning everything they thought they controlled. And that, my friends, is exactly what I did.